lecture on urban design, and we have Jeff Williams from Perkins and Will, and he's actually an architect by training, but then he has planning and urban design degrees, and if you want to fit more in, go ahead.
All right. Well, thank you guys. And if anyone wants to come forward, you can.
I think they like the seats with the back.
Oh, they like the seats with the back. Right.
Because these actually aren't as comfortable as you think.
Yeah, so my name is Jeff Williams, and I'm an urban designer with Perkins and Will here in our Atlanta office. Just a little bit of background. We're a firm of about 2,000 people in 20-some offices all around the world, mostly in North America, but also London and Dubai and Shanghai and those sorts of places. Our Atlanta office is large. We're about 200 people here, which makes us, one of the two largest offices in the firm. So this is a serious root of our practice here in Atlanta. My work is both really local, and I'll show you one of those projects, but we're working now on the Turner Field redevelopment plan. It's an LCI here in the city. So that all the way to projects I was talking about with earlier about in Turkey and some things like that you'll also see. There's about 50 slides in here, and I think it'll be about 30 minutes so you guys can get out and get into the bars before happy hour or something like that. And really, if you have any questions along the way, I think it's Friday afternoon, and you can interrupt me if you want to. And so urban design, Perkins and Will. I'm going to talk a little bit about our approach, but I'm not going to talk about that really until the very end. And in a way, it's kind of a boring part of this. But I will be trying to make an argument throughout that our work is based, I think, in the little things that cumulatively make something and make the places that we live in. And so I hope you'll see that through the projects that I brought. These two fellows, this is an image I like. This is Larry Perkins and Phil Will, the guys who founded our company. And this is like, the iconic image of some architects. And they're sitting there, poring over this blueprint. The guy's got a scale, and there's this looming metropolis in the background. And I like it just because it's sort of, it's sort of humorous, an image like this. But also that there's this association between architecture and urbanism, which sometimes I think is overlooked, but clearly not by you as students of urban design. And so this is something that actually just this last week I was looking at this book. You guys know this book? Do you know this book? Anyway, Edmund Bacon, Design of Cities, but there's a lot in there that you should take with a grain of salt, not take too seriously, but you can learn quite a bit from this. And particularly, I like this spread, and it's called The Great Amputation. And there's these two drawings that Edmund Bacon claims were drawn in the same year, and this is a bad scan from the copier this morning. But on the one side, there's this Beaux-Arts plan, and it's if you can't see buildings or landscape or city exactly in the image, that's because there's absolutely no difference, that it was treated as one field of design, both the city and the interior of architecture and the landscape around it. And I think that's something. And in that same year, Corbusier draws a sketch like this, and he claims with this sketch and Corbusier's work that there was this amputation in the field between architecture and landscape and city making, where buildings are one thing and the landscape is its own independent thing. And from that point on, we've been operating this way, and as disciplines in isolation. And I think that if anything, urbanism is about bringing all of those things back together, and it's a particular task, I think, of designers to do that. And so I think one is the difference between people that like cities and people that are invested in designing them is also the difference of the way that you might view this image, right? And so this is a beautiful landscape, and we go out into nature and we look at things like this, and they seem inevitable, right? That they were just like placed on Earth the way they are in full maturity. But when you look at this same landscape as a geologist, you see a landscape of dynamic change, right? And so it's something that didn't just manifest itself complete there, that it's something that was a process that came to completion. I'm going to move through some of this general urbanism stuff quickly, and I feel like a lot of times we go to a place like Paris and we look at it in the exact same way, that there's this awe and there's a sense of inevitability about it, that it's just, Paris has always been this way. And I think for urban designers, it's important to think about, just 175 years ago, that they sat down and they were drawing drawings, much like the drawings you're probably going to do in your urban design studio. And they dreamed up this amazing infrastructure that they were going to run through the city, and they did, regular plan and section drawings just like we do, and details of things like lights. And then they went out into the world, and this is a diagram of the Avenue of the Opera being cut through the city, right? And so you can see what was there previously, and then the avenue being ripped through that fabric. And if this isn't proof enough, this image is awesome, and it'll take just a second to be able to realize what's going on because it's kind of grainy. But this is the work of making a city, right? So this is, at the time, these are horse-drawn, this is like horse-drawn grading equipment and guys with shovels and pickaxes and things. And in the background, you can see them actually, they've just gone through and ripped up people's buildings to build this thing that all of us go to Paris and we sit in the cafes and we're like, oh, it's just Paris. No, it was the work of architects and designers just like us doing it. So what does that mean? I think that just a little bit of context for what I think is going on in the work that we do is we're on this historic trajectory through the Second Arab Empire in Paris to today, where there's this tipping point that we're passing now in global rural and urban population. So now more people are living in cities than ever before, and the projections are that people will increasingly live in cities more than they were in rural areas. At the same time, global population is increasing. And so that means the business of making cities is ever more critical if we're to make places that are that really enrich people's lives. And this is a global challenge, and this is just a breakdown of that same percentage of urban and rural population by region across the world, and every region of the world is urbanizing, period. So that's in the background of some of this. And so I'm going to go through a couple of our projects, and the first one is the Beltline, and you guys all know this and probably have been out on the Beltline, but it's I think in a suite of urban initiatives that are really important with the cities we live in maturing, and there being infrastructure that its original purpose is in the past, and we have to use these pieces of infrastructure to suit our new ways of life. And so just an aerial view of the city of Atlanta and the Beltline. You guys all, you know this stuff, right? Right, okay. So we'll move through this fairly quickly. The East Side trail design, taking a landscape like this and turning it into this. So this is a photo of it today. And also starting to think about when the transit does come through, and we see more and more of the development that's occurring on that side. The type of urban project that really turns the trajectory of our growth and the way we live in the city on its head. And obviously there are spaces like this all around the world in every city that will increasingly be vitally important. Then there's other spaces, and so this is a project in Gainesville, Florida that we worked on a couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago. Downtown Gainesville is on the top of the slide, and the University of Florida, if any of you know, Gainesville is sort of off to your left about a mile away. On the bottom of the slide is a stormwater park that the city is building. It's actually near completion, though it wasn't in this aerial photograph. And so and right in the middle is a little industrial belt that was there, built around the railroads, the kind of space you see in every city everywhere. All of that, those industries had moved out of those buildings, and so there was this kind of gap between the place that's the historic heart of the city and this new sort of premier park or central park that they were building. And our project in the orange was looking at an old power plant and property that the utility company owned. It was about 10 acres, and they wanted to use it to do something, but they didn't know quite what. And it's been rezoned, and developers have been talked to, and it has not yet developed, but the idea was that they wanted it to be a place where that filled a void in the city as a destination, as a place for that small businesses might go. And so we thought about this idea of density done differently. And I'm going to flip forward and flip back. So they've seen the regular type of urban redevelopment of podium buildings and parking decks wrapped with housing and all of that. And they actually asked us to think about how they might do their density differently. One, we talked about reducing the overall parking that would be required on the site and moving that off the site. We talked about making micro plots instead of mega plots, and so going through and actually subdividing the land down to an essential depth of some essential dimensions. We were looking at 60 feet as the overall depth of a property that fits into structural bays. That's, if anything, the most flexible basic unit that there can be in architecture and urbanism. And that would allow them to redevelop this incrementally. And so you can see the plan, and I think one thing you don't really see in this plan on a relatively small site is many big moves, and that was intentional. We were thinking about making something that was integrated with the scale of the neighborhood that it was adjacent to, and also made lots of small spaces. And so about a year after our plan came through, internet music business that now lost a major lawsuit, is no longer in business, came through, and they wanted the entire property for what they were going to make as a corporate campus. If any of you guys listen to Groove Shark, this was for them. And they wanted to put housing, they wanted to put their office, they wanted to make music venue space in here, they wanted to reuse the old warehouses as canteens for their business. And so we helped them imagine this non-traditional corporate campus. And so you can think of what, if you're familiar with Apple's big office project, I think this sort of stands in opposition to that way of thinking. Some of our international work that also is along these themes. This is Istanbul, the historic peninsula, and you can see the Topkapi Palace sort of in the foreground, and Hagia Sophia. And so this is Istanbul today. This is an example of of a global megacity, I guess you would call it. It's going through a phase of rapid urbanization. The UN projects the population of Istanbul may increase to many tens of millions of people. It's an incredibly congested city. But at the center of all of this is, this kind of this precious district and this precious core of the city that's vital and full of life and is layered with history. And so in this image, there's these two white buildings on the left-hand side of the slide. There's two tall buildings, so that's a point of reference. And the camera is going to turn, and you can still see those two white buildings in the sort of the top third of the slide. This is an old port site along the Golden Horn, which is a historically significant urban waterway that was incredibly polluted up through until very recently. Efforts have gone through and they've been able to clean it, but all along the waterfront, it used to be an industrial waterfront, and this was a shipbuilding yard that goes back to like the 16th century. That was an Ottoman shipbuilding facility, and it's full of all of these old warehouses that I'll show you. But you can sort of see how the city has grown all around this from the image I previously showed. But there's this one old relic of a different time. And so here is what our site looked like previously, and you can see there's these, like that building there. This is an old shipbuilding warehouse where they used to roll the boat directly out of that and launch them there in the Golden Horn. And we were working for a client, and this project is we're still working on. It's been a few years, and it's a fairly controversial project in Istanbul for a variety of reasons. Its historic significance is paramount to some of the challenges to redevelop it, and it's going through historic review committees. But you can see the types of spaces that are here. I mean, among pieces of land in the world, I think this is among the finest, most interesting, most layered sites that anyone can work on. I mean, you're looking at across the water at Hagia Sophia and all of the historic monuments of Istanbul, and on the waterfront, and in the middle of it are all of these spaces, so these old industrial spaces with their own incredible beauty. And it's like I feel like I travel around the world a lot and go and visit many sites and do lots of plans like this, and you continually go to these places where you sort of wish they didn't have to redevelop because their character is so striking. But so we worked on a plan for this, and it really consisted of 3 layers. One, that it's very long, and we divided the site into a series of districts that were characterized by the historic structures that were there in place, and you can see those in red. And then we thought that if anything should be a driving force in the project, it should just be access to the water and access to the views. And so we tried to identify every place that you could create a pedestrian path to the waterfront, or a street through the existing buildings and through future parcels. And so you can see that on the bottom. And eventually it created a plan like this. This is a kind of a rich plan. It's hard to process in a setting like this. But a continuous public waterfront, new landmark structures, cultural facilities, mosques, museums, conference centers, new hotels, shopping, housing, everything knitted into that structure of pathways to the waterfront. And so you can see here in red are the historic structures that were slated to remain on the site. And then in black are the new buildings, and in gray we were asked, there were a series of historic structures that no longer exist, but there are photographs of, that they wanted reconstructed, and you can see those in gray. And so this is an aerial view looking back at the project and the districts that we created. That each had their own kind of their unique character around these old structures, and so there's a preponderance of warehouses in this one area, and we wanted to maintain that sort of warehouse structure, thinking more loft office and that kind of thing. In the middle were these huge shipyards and these giant ramps, and we wanted to reuse those for cultural facilities. Housing on the right side of the slide, which is the east, and a few images of that project. And so this image is sitting on one of these enormous boat ramps that come out of the water, and we wanted to use that as a gathering and performance space, a food hall in the background in the old warehouses, and then some new structures that you can see on the left-hand side. And then there were these, this thing that's red. There are all of these cranes all over the site, and we wanted to reposition some of those as public art and then paint them red. This is an image along the waterfront. So that structure on the right was an existing warehouse, and we wanted to pull all the sides off of it and insert new buildings into it. And then on the hillside, smaller structures. This was a small hotel, and what you see in the foreground underneath was the prison for the shipyard, and it's in a state of ruin, and so we wanted to leave it that way and use that as a sculpture garden. So we're trying to fit all of these new buildings into this old fabric. And there's our project at night looking back, so you can see all the way at the background the Blue Mosque, Mehmed, and the Topkapi Palace, and the landmarks of historic Istanbul in our project there along the waterway. And so that's us taking on a mega project and trying to do it in a way that is not heroic, so trying to break down the scale of the project to the experience of people, trying to preserve as many structures as possible, and doing what could be a really tragic thing for Istanbul in the most sensitive way that we know how, and I hope that comes through in the project. Then there's other international projects that are, of a little bit grander scale, and so this is Doha, Qatar, and it's a Gulf state. It's a small country along the Arabian Gulf, bordered by Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain's near there for your global geography. This is Doha historically. In 1950 or so, it was a city of about 20,000 people, a sleepy little village. And this is the city today. It's growing. It's 1.5 million people. They've reconstructed the waterfront. They've built. So this is the historic city, and you can see the kind of the small grain fabric, courtyard buildings. A very sustainable type of urbanism in a really harsh climate, and in prominent civic structures and so forth. And so this is the city today. This is the West Bay area. And you can, none of this existed like 20 years ago, right? And now there's like a real city there, right? There's dozens and dozens of skyscrapers, and the world's changing like that. And our job is to go out there and deal with it. I have spent more of my life there than probably I care to spend. But it looks like this on the ground, and so from afar it looks like a real city, kind of a metropolis growing out there, and it's dead, right? So there are all these huge buildings that presumably have people living in them and companies in them. The street life there is no street life. There's no like urban experience, no walking experience. No one goes anywhere, and so there's this strange rapid urbanization and at the same time lack of any kind of livability or quality of place that you would expect to be there, as opposed to the historic areas of the city. And so this is a traditional market, a souk, that's so life in the city operated at a much different scale than it is today. And you can see the way that the historic city is being treated now, massive parking lots and so forth. That area that I was showing with all of the tall buildings is kind of there along the coast. We were hired to do a master plan for a research district, an innovation district at the edge of a new university that they're building, which is the little blue spot out there on the left side of the slide. And our site is outlined there in blue. And if you're not aware of this overall initiative called Education City in Doha, it's worth looking at both urbanistically and architecturally. It's kind of hard to pick out, the slide's a little washed, but they had this campus plan, and they've now hired all of the star architects to do projects. So OMA has 2 buildings going up there, and Toyoito and all. I mean, it's a who's who of architecture, and some some interesting structures, I think, from when you're thinking about global urbanism. And so we had a really simple concept for the project. So on the left side of the slide, those are the principal structures of the campus, of the university campus at scale to our site. And all we told them to do is, if they could do anything, is to just bring all of those projects a little bit closer together, because the spaces between the buildings are impossible to walk between. It's too hot there, and they create no actual fabric that anyone would actually use. And so we use that as the genesis of our plan. And so we had a few existing conditions on our site, a big R&D building that was already existing, some intersections and gateways. We tried to establish a few landmarks that had the potential to be more iconic pieces of architecture along the edge of the site. Then connect those together through a path network, not too dissimilar in thinking to what Baron Haussmann was doing in Paris from my earlier slides. And then along those pathways, creating destinations that would be cool and climatically controlled naturally through shade and so forth. And then just infilling everything around that as much as possible with new buildings. And so you can see this is the plan we developed. And they paid us a pretty nice fee to draw them a drawing like this. And it's I hope it looks very chaotic, because that was the intention. And you can see in orange the pedestrian path network that we created through this while still introducing new streets, buffering the site with a perimeter landscape that included dunes that would mitigate the prevailing winds of dust coming into the site on the western side. And then you can see the project from the air, looking back, and if you knew the buildings, you'd be able to pick out all of these, these look-at-me pieces of architecture around their campus. But what it actually was a program that they had given to us that was made of about 7 buildings actually. And so if it looks like 1,000 different buildings, that was also intentional. So trying to take what is typically very inhumane pieces of architecture, so institutional buildings that you can see all over your campus, labs, which aren't thought of as humane buildings, can be very big and dense, and breaking all of that scale down, like forcing it through cheesecloth. And then the spaces that we were trying to create much smaller, human scale, events along pathways and buildings that screen those walkways and provide shade throughout. And so those are some projects. And this is something we wrote about a year ago, and because when you take projects like the ones that I've just shown you to people, it's kind of hard for clients to synthesize what our approach to urban design is. That there's not a lot of big moves. That it's hard to see discernible shapes in things that people tend to latch onto. And so, but we felt like, if anything, our approach is it's layered, and the layers are really important. I know this is really boring as the last thing to talk about, but the first layer is adaptability of a urban framework built out of streets and blocks that have the potential to change over time. And so there's a big difference between a large mega project or a developer's master plan and a piece of a city. And that's primarily in the way that we structure that space in the urban framework. And so we like to make pieces of cities and not developer projects. And our projects, we try for them to be as open and accessible as they can possibly be, and as public as they can possibly be. And so for that last project, we fought a fight because they wanted to put that entire project behind a wall, and we had security consultants, and we were able to talk to them about securing the buildings at the building scale instead of at the campus scale. And so everywhere we go, we're trying to make things public and open, that people talk about. I mean, and probably you guys, about sustainability and environmentalism. That I think we think of that more generally as stewardship, and with sustainability, there's also community orientedness. And so we were trying to think of a larger population than just that of our clients. And identity, and this is, I think, hopefully is coming through in some of these projects, but the place itself should inform the work that you do. And I know it's like, that seems obvious, and even looking across the back wall here, at the projects hanging up and everything, but it's actually not that universal. That we try not to take a formula or a set design and move it around and recreate the same thing. That hopefully all of those projects had a vein running through them, but was each one of them was unique to their site and the place. And then above all, that all of these kinds of best practice things don't really matter if we're not making places that people love. And so that comes down to design quality and just environment and being really, really intentional about those things. And so this is the unheroic approach to urban design, and it's also kind of an unheroic way to end this presentation, but this is the end. So if you guys have any questions, I'm happy to
Can
answer.
you also talk about the piece where we want to hear about what you look in the people who are applying
Oh,
for urban design projects? What
Yeah.
proficiencies, licensure, skill sets?
yeah. Well, so I have a bachelor's degree in architecture, and then I studied, I got a master's degree in both architecture and city planning. For us, I mean, right now in our team here, in our urban design team here in Atlanta, that everyone has at least 2 different degrees, and everyone has a basis in design, so architecture, landscape architecture, whatever. I think that the difference, for me, just like a basic difference between city planning and urban design is a very vague thing, but that if you don't draw at any point in your project, probably you're doing policy and city planning. And so that's absolutely essential. And then people with diversity are, that's, I think that's who urban designers tend to be, with, more than one viewpoint or more than one interest. And so, yeah, so go get some other degrees if you want to.
What fascinated you with the urban design instead of architecture?
Yeah, so I went to school at the University of Florida, and I moved up here because an ex-girlfriend moved up here, and it seemed like we were going to get back together, and we didn't. And my friend was here, and so I moved up to Atlanta and just got a job. All of you are probably way more like self-aware and organized about your lives and careers than I was at that time. And so I just kind of showed up and got an apartment, and then at the time faxed my resume. Literally, I faxed my resume to every fax number for an architecture firm in the phone book. And a few people called me, and so I had this architecture job. And at first, it was really awesome, and I felt like I was learning things. And after a while, I got tired of the job of architecture, and I don't have a capacity for a whole lot of detail, which is one thing. And I felt like I had a lot of, and this isn't the profession of architecture everywhere, but I did have a lot of repetitive tasks and things, and I was bored, and I wanted to do something different. So I thought first, I'm going to go back to grad school because I didn't have a master's degree in architecture. I'm just going to go to school, and then that'll change things. And I started in the architecture program, and then I saw that Georgia Tech had offered a dual degree in city planning, and I had never met a city planner. I had no idea. I mean, this is how unaware of things I didn't really even know that it was something that people did. But then there were some very inspiring teachers at Georgia Tech, most notably Doug Allen, who was just a titan. and I went to him and I said, do people actually do urban design? I mean, is that something like I can get a job at? And he said, absolutely. And so I moved on that path, and so here I am. And I still, though, I mean, I was never licensed. I'm not a licensed architect, but I work in an architecture firm, and I think that if I didn't have a background in architecture, I just wouldn't fit in. I mean, we work on projects that are, you know, just weaving in and out of architecture and urbanism and so forth.
Do you look for licensed planners, or does it matter?
I think, I mean, for me, for us, I mean, they do, like, you know, in our HR people want you to have licenses and do things like that. But for me, like hiring, it's, you know, a talented person, a highly skilled, talented person can get a job anywhere. And so that's
So the portfolio becomes more
portfolio,
important.
absolutely, skills, attitude. I mean, you guys probably, I don't know if you guys do or don't know it, but like, your eagerness to jump in and be positive about work is, you know, huge. And being able to show that at a job interview is, don't play it cool, if anything. So,
Specific skill sets in terms of computer,
Yeah.
softwares, I mean, is there specific for urban design, or is it just all over the board, the same kind of?
yeah, I'm now kind of a dinosaur in terms of skill sets, but we across the board for architecture, we're using Revit. It's just, you know, that's the only thing. Revit hasn't fit real well with our work, and so we're now everyone's starting to use Rhino, and we're you know, Rhino, and I mean the ability to use Grasshopper for coding is something that's emerging as a really important skill set. And we're doing a lot now. We're trying, our global urban design practice, we're trying to build some tools to make Rhino work a little bit more like Revit, and then build a lot of urban design modules in that allow us to calculate things, to run performas for developers, like, you know, do sort of financial payback and everything directly out of our models. Energy analysis and a lot of those things is coming through Rhino. But I mean, the basics, which I'm sure you guys like, Illustrator and, you know, basic CAD drafting and stuff like that.
When it comes to adding in like ideas of like your 5 core principles, when someone's interviewing a student, their portfolio, should they sort of organize it in a way that really shows the way they think about design, their analytical skills, their representation, that kind of a thing?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
I just want you to reinforce that.
yeah, I mean, you know, this kind of, this branding thing is kind of important. And I mean, if anything, I think that this list for us, it's a vehicle for communicating abstract things to people that don't think abstractly about design, and so it's narrative and it's storytelling. And I mean, a lot of times our projects will start with narrative and storytelling, and not with, I don't know, like axes and regulating lines and site sections and all of that sort of stuff. It's like, you know, what does this place want to be, or
What is it about?
yeah, what is it about, and then sort of working that way, which is a very good way to move clients through a project.
Just a thought, you know, that on the skill, we were talking about
Yeah.
skill. Of course, these kids are pretty savvy with Revit and related, all
Yeah.
kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
But when it comes to actually doing design and design thinking, and the
Yeah.
other kid, like you said, so the process actually begins with the actual rhino models, or will you really go straight into physical models, or is it a combination?
I think you're asking a leading question, and it's a good one. We don't build as many physical models as we should, and that's something we're trying to change. That if I could, but you know, it's like some of our projects they're hard to construct. I would love to do a whole project in just a physical model, and I haven't done that in a long time, since grad school or something. But it's, I mean, it's freehand drawing. It's a bunch of people sitting around a room with a roll of trace paper. Tends to be the actual genesis of everything, and do you guys draw? Do you think? Do you draw to think? I mean, when you're talking about ideas, do you draw the ideas and stuff? It's fundamental skill. Like I really worry, and I know. I mean, a lot of you guys are nodding your heads, but I know you guys because we employ them. That there's this. You start the project, and it's like everyone goes to their computers, and it's like, what's going on? You know, I'm like always like, what's going on in there?
Yes.
It's like, where is the actual project? Because the project, you know, that's not somehow real. Like as a real connection between your ideas and design. It can be, and I know you guys are super savvy, and I know that people are using the tools differently than I do in the way that I learn them. But drawing, not even like classical drawing, even, you know, which is now not really important. It's actually the thing that the computer does really well is formal drawings and polished things, but it's like the really messy drawing is the most important kind. Is that what you're getting?
No, actually, why I was further extending the idea of the talk with you is that it's a quite contention in the academic setting versus what the profession is asking. Profession is looking for those, you know, who have some certain skill sets.
Yeah.
And that skill sets may not be, of course, the thinking skill sets are pretty much given, but the computer skill sets, coding skill sets, all of those skill sets are the one these kids know that if they have it, they will get the job.
Yeah.
And they'll be part of the machine.
Yeah.
In academic settings, our biggest push is, look, come on, you know, those skill sets will always come to you.
Yeah.
But like you were just saying, pointing out, the thinking skill sets have to be.
Yeah.
So.
Absolutely. I mean, I've taught a few times, and it's, and you guys may feel it sometimes, but I mean, like, basic problem solving is like when do you learn this stuff if you don't learn it right now in architecture school and like really invest your, and I think architects, designers should have like some of the strongest methods for thinking about problems, and that's all a project is. A project is just a problem that you find elegant ways of solving, and to solve that it's like you have to pull all of the pieces of the problem out and look at them in their own ways and figure out how you put it all back together again, and that's not in any kind of program or something that you can learn.
So when you were talking about creating a narrative or storytelling to sort of generate a project but also communicate it to a client, and that context also becomes important, and unique context and identity. How, since you've shown so many projects in different places, how do you expose yourself or understand and research the context and create the narrative and the storytelling?
How do you, what's that?
Go around us.
Yeah, I mean, being there in person is a huge step. I mean, I have done it before, but I really don't like to work on a project in a place that I haven't been, because there's almost no way of really understanding a place without physically being there. And actually, most of the time, like thinking about narrative, that most of the time that the story or the central part of our projects or the design comes while you're there, and it's like you kind of see things, and I mean, we do all of the kind of basic sort of stuff that you would do, but
So history, like in the Istanbul one, you would say you have to respond to history.
yeah, definitely. I mean that's just. I mean, I like seeing the whole development of a place in order to get it, and it's. Yeah, I mean, like going to a place, you have to like go somewhere and see what's nice or what's works, and a lot of times I mean, like our culture has just gone nuts, and we're making horrible things, and it's good to be able to see that and be able to respond to that. And I think that for the most part, people anywhere understand that when it's pointed out.
I think it's important because when you look at, we haven't seen, more of the, domestic national projects.
Yeah.
But when we look at the urban design in the United States, you usually see this mixed use, medium density,
Yeah.
cookie cutter everywhere, right?
Yeah.
You go all
Yeah.
around Atlanta and you
Yeah.
see the same Starbucks,
Yeah.
same kind of,
Yeah.
development and same kind of streetscape design everywhere.
Yeah.
But when you go to these places and then you actually go around
Yeah.
and then look at the history, look at the pattern,
Yeah.
right? Look at the experience,
Yeah.
how people feel, and what are the layers of information,
Yeah. That's right.
spatially, experientially, historically. Then it all comes together. I really appreciate that you look at that and then make the experience and the pattern in the place embedded into the identity.
Yeah.
I think that's what's lacking because here we erase everything
Yeah.
and then we actually build new.
Yeah.
I mean, even in this area, you
Yeah.
might not be, aware. When you look at Cobb Parkway,
Uh-huh.
people think that there's no identity because the way that they experience is drive through as
Yeah.
fast as
Yeah.
possible.
Yeah.
But when the students started walking around,
Yeah.
they realized all kinds of different things that you wouldn't have known.
Uh-huh.
And they started connecting it to the university, to the community, looked at the patterns of, the physical character.
Uh-huh.
And all of a sudden, it turned into a different project.
Yeah.
Because
It's,
previously they were trying to get rid of the car industry.
yeah.
And then we said, you know what, Tesla is going to come here. We have a mechanical engineering
Yeah.
that actually wins awards,
Yeah.
right, throughout years. And then, why don't we create a synergy? And
Absolutely.
maybe the car industry that people think that is not the identity, that it will spoil the identity, is the identity.
Yeah.
I think it's important to know how to look at the site and then analyze the site
Yeah.
in a way to come up with that narrative.
Yeah.
that you're talking
That's
about.
an interesting project. I mean, a big commercial highway essentially is a very hard urban design project. But yeah, like you're saying, if you really look at it, it becomes a much richer thing than the monolithic monolithic thing that it appears to be. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you were talking about the identity. The really fun part happened when we were doing an urban project in Bellagio.
In where?
In Bellagio, we
Uh-huh.
were doing an urban
Yeah.
project there. And we were talking about a narrative, and I was giving my colleague, who is a professor there in Milan, so he was having a rough time when I said, oh my goodness, look at this beautiful arcade and we have McDonald's right inside. Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
This will be a very different tasting McDonald's now. Oh, I said, shut up, you American,
Right.
So this was very interesting how the cultural forces, which is a dominant culture of a very powerful country, is actually playing a very interesting role in the historic fabric of cities there.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot more responsibility comes on us, as to like you said,
Yeah.
when we go into Istanbul or in Italy or projects where there is a sitting fabric which is very rich
Yeah.
historically,
Yeah.
and how we connect to ourselves is a It's a very eerie feeling, you know, what you add to it, you know.
Yeah.
What like you were pointing out that the project Istanbul, the one that worked on, there are certain elements which you just don't want to touch, you know, and yet you have to do something to it.
Yeah.
And that language, the new language you add to it, how much it contrasts or complement or contradict is an open game, you know, because like my friend says, and the one who teaches in Milan, he said, but you have to do something beyond that. You can't sit with the history all the time.
Right.
So there is a very interesting contention in Europe that we have to go and do something beyond the history.
Yeah.
And we, on the other hand, being the new world,
Yeah.
we lack that.
Yeah.
part.
We're
So
extra
there is
nostalgic
always
for it.
this development of narrative is very different.
Yeah.
in different locations.
Yeah. We've been. I mean, you wrestle with it everywhere of what's the balance
Yes.
between universal things and, you know, contemporary society and the modern world and all of that, and modernization, particularly when you're working in a place like Turkey, that there's, you know, becoming modern and international and European is you know, there's an aspiration in that, and like, so how do you balance that versus the uniqueness of place and those things, particularly when, you know, I mean, and now we're on enough projects that it's hard. I mean, we're looking in the last year, I've worked on several projects that look at, you know, whole districts of huge areas of the city of Istanbul, neighborhoods that are will be raised under the kind of a movement from the government to try to build higher standard housing for seismic conditions, but it's going back through and rebuilding huge portions of the city. And for us, you know, like coming as outsiders and trying to, you know, bring contemporary building types, but still like fit within the context and create part of a new modern identity for Turkey is, I mean, it's a lot of weight on your shoulders.
And a new modern context isn't a pastiche of making it look like the old.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, and that's important to know.
Extra hard. Yeah.
You can't make it look old, you can't make it look new. You're
Yeah.
kind of stuck between a situation, you know, like you gave an example of Doha project.
Yeah.
Where, you know, all those towers are going up, you know, in a
Yeah.
very cookie cutter way. You know, of course, the skins are different and all
Yeah.
of that. And like you pointed out, it's a very empty, roads are empty, nothing else is there. And then they have an historic fabric or the older fabric,
Yeah.
we say not
Yeah.
historic. Which may have some richness to it, you know, and you gave an example there.
That's right.
That is what we are, I mean, for us Americans, when we go there, we get absolutely enchanted by it.
Yeah.
But when they come and see
Yeah.
our work, they get enchanted
Yeah,
by
yeah,
our
love it,
work.
yeah.
So they want to see this progress coming over there.
Yeah.
And so it's very interesting.
So here's the flip side of that is, you know, we go and do this international work and we become very romantic about it, and then we come home.
Yes.
And
Yes.
there were, I mean, when you're working in, you know, the Belt Line and work in the city and so forth, but like we you know, our firm will do a hospital or something in like Noonan, Georgia. And if that same hospital we were working on in China or in someplace else, we would find some cultural inspiration for the work, but when we do it in Noonan, we just do modernism or something.
We just do
It's
it.
Yeah, it's just,
Yes, exactly.
you just do architecture, so I don't know.
Any last questions, comments, guys? Okay, well, thanks so much
All right, thank you
for
very much.
coming and sharing your experience.